The last question we'll be dealing with regards to the June questions is to do with the VAT treatment of spouses married in community of property. And yes, we still do have people that's married in community of property. Now, the question is if one of the two spouses conducts an enterprise, a VAT enterprise, what is the impact on the other? Now, just generally speaking, any spouses married in community of property is regarded as conducting an enterprise separate from the spouses as a body of persons. So they must register separately and they must account for the VAT as that separate person. The challenge comes in where one of the spouses conduct an enterprise and the other one doesn't. And what happened in that specific case was the one on the property where they live, they also built a little office space. And the question then was, is this office space linked to the enterprise? In this case it was, because it was the office space for the enterprise. But what is the impact on the other spouse? So in terms of property law, fixed property is owned half-half by spouses married in community of property. So the moment they build the office space, half the office space will be owned by the other spouse. So has a supply been made by the one spouse to the other spouse? And in that case, the supply would have been made in terms of the value of the property being transferred. And then that would be a supply made by the VAT vendor, which means there is VAT payable. So that is the question. The technical answer has to be on the input tax side. The spouse that's bought the office space will be entitled to a full input tax deduction because it's linked directly to the property that's used for VAT enterprise purposes. But whether a supply has been made of the half share to the other spouse remains a question of fact. Now, technically, a supply must have been made because somebody else now owns half the property. The question then is, at what value should be placed on that supply? Now, again, if we go back to value, you need to look at what has been paid for that. Clearly, nothing has been paid for that. If you can't determine if there's no payment, keeping in mind the two spouses are connected persons for VAT purposes, then you have to work on the market value. The market value of that supply will then be the present market value, and that must take into account that the other spouse, the non-VAT vendor spouse, will not have the use of that property for who knows how long, until the enterprise ends. So it has to take that into account. So when you determine market value, you've got to say it's the present value of something. We're just not sure exactly what that something is. Now, whether that value is determinable is challenging. It might even be that we come to the conclusion it's not determinable. If it's not determinable, there is no amount for VAT purposes, there's no value, and there's no value payable, no VAT payable. The other challenging thing is the new legislation doesn't deal with that. It deals with supplies between connected parties, but it doesn't deal with the issue of leasehold improvements under these circumstances. So we don't know what the answer is based on the new proposed legislation. But in terms of general VAT rules, there certainly seems to be a supply of some sorts, but it seems like like placing a value on that supply is going to be more than just challenging and probably beyond the ability to place a value on that for VAT purposes. But again, this just demonstrates how technically it gets sometimes. It also demonstrates something else. It demonstrates we can't just know the VAT Act. We need to know all the other acts and what the implication of those acts is on the conclusion that we're trying to come to. So hopefully you found that of some interest. If you want to have a closer look at this, you can also look at the SARS guide dealing with property and other similar circumstances, and also estates. They deal with this to some extent in those publications. Have a look at those. Otherwise, give us some feedback whether these videos do provide you with meaningful inputs. Does it help you? And also distribute this to use it for training purposes in your own offices. Do with it whatever you want. It is there as an open source available to anybody.